Hi, I'm in the book Recovering Biblical Manhood and Womanhood, Chapter 20. This article was done by George W. Knight III. Just a little bit about him. He was Dean and Professor of New Testament at Knox Theological Seminary, the father of 5 and the grandfather of 4 at the writing of this book. He has since died. And he taught New Testament and New Testament Greek at Covenant Theological Seminary in St. Louis, Missouri. Authored several books, including the Pastoral Epistles and a short commentary of Timothy and Titus, which is included in the Baker commentary of the Bible. His chapter that he was assigned to is The Family and the Church. How should biblical manhood and womanhood work out in practice? Now, he starts his introduction with many texts that we've already dealt with in other presentations in this book. But I wanted to read the introduction because of where it leads to, the first point that he's making that I wanted to talk about. The introduction says, as we have seen throughout this book, the Bible is quite clear that men and women are equally God's image bearers. Genesis 1:27. And therefore equal before God and in relationship with one another. And also that they are fellow heirs in the Christian life, equal in their spiritual standing before God. 1 Peter 3:7 and Galatians 3:28. The Bible is also clear that men and women who are equal with respect to creation and redemption, and therefore share many things in common, are called to different and equally important roles in marriage and the church. It is God Himself who has determined distinctive roles for men and women in order that thereby they may fulfill the creation mandate that He has given to mankind. And then he references Genesis 1:28 and chapter 3, verses 15 to 19. God has called men to serve as leaders in marriage and the church, and women to submit themselves willingly to the leadership as they labor together in their distinctive roles. Ephesians 5, verses 23 to 24, and 1 Peter 3, verses 1 to 6, 1 Timothy 2:12, and 3, the first 13 verses. In defining how men and women are to relate to one another in fulfilling their respective roles, God has called men to exercise a headship that is loving, gentle, and considerate. Ephesians 5:25 and forward, and 1 Peter 3:7. And He has called women to submit to that headship in a willing, gentle, and respectful way. Ephesians 5, verses 24 and 33, and 1 Peter 3, the first 2 verses. The question we all now face is how to carry out our biblical roles with biblical attitudes in specific, everyday situations. But before we proceed to positive outworkings of biblical manhood and womanhood, we need to be more aware of the forces working against us that must be overcome and the antidotes of God's grace that God's grace provides. So it was this latter part that I wanted to point to. His next subheading is the effect of sin. So this was the point that I wanted to specifically talk about in his chapter. It's the only point I'm going to take from this chapter. So here he says, just as sin, as a result of the fall, will bring pain, Genesis 3:16, to the joy of childbirth, the fulfillment of God's mandate to be fruitful, Genesis 1:28, and sweat and difficulty to the joy of work, the fulfillment of God's mandate to subdue the earth and rule over it, Genesis 1:28. So also it will strive into the role relationship God has established between man and woman at creation, Genesis 2:18. One of our pastors used to say, sin begets sin. So I think this focus on being aware of both of our capacities for sin is important, because it's going to help you in your respective roles. He has correlation of role and attitude as another subheading. And here he says, any discussion of the practical outworkings of biblical principles of headship and submission must take into account these sinful tendencies that so easily subvert us and work against compliance with biblical norm. We need to notice again how carefully the apostles present their teaching on the role relationship of men and women, so as to affirm two things simultaneously, and thereby to give balance to their teaching. First, they reiterate the mandate of God about the role relationship based on creation, and speak of headship of men and submission of women. Second, they demand attitudes and actions that will seek to overcome the sinful tendencies that work against the proper functioning of these roles. Because, and these are the two points especially, notice this. Because people in authority, as a result of sin, often seek to rule and dominate with selfish and cruel attitudes, men are instructed not to be embittered against their wives, Colossians 3:19, but to love them and give themselves to them, Ephesians 5:25, to nourish and cherish them, Ephesians 5:29, and to honor them as fellow heirs, 1 Peter 3:7. And then the second one, because people under authority, as a result of sin, often resent their role and seek to minimize or escape it, or to take the position of leadership, women are repeatedly urged to submit, 1 Peter 3:1, Ephesians 5:24, Colossians 3:18, and Titus 2:5. Because it is God's will and should be done as to the Lord, Ephesians 5:27, and with respect, Ephesians 5:33, and a gentle and quiet spirit, 1 Peter 3:4. The balanced interrelationship of these two truths must control any discussion of the day-to-day situation, since these are the operative principles that the Scripture give to guide us in all such day-to-day outworkings of male-female role relationship in marriage and the church. Thus, we must constantly reiterate the roles of headship and submission, and also constantly call for attitudes and actions that enable those roles to be fulfilled by God's grace in the world where sin works from within and without against those roles and against those attitudes and actions. So I just thought this was very important. The awareness of both the male and the female's sinfulness is going to humble us and help us to be more, have more forbearance for each other, because we're aware of our sinfulness. I'm going to link to a video about Joseph. It's grace, not justice, for Joseph's brothers.